Dear God, we're thankful for this group of people we have together. We're thankful that you allow us to gather and communicate today. Help us to be kind in our interactions and thoughtful in our interactions towards others. Please help us to be able to be focused on things that you would have us be focused on and not be distracted by things of this world and people that are trying to deceive us. We know that you have an amazing plan and purpose for our lives and the relationships and the experiences that you give us. We're thankful. Amen. All right. Okay, so as I said, the talk today is anger and them, racism and us. So unless you've been living under a rock for the last week, you know that it was, our country is already kind of getting divided and getting kind of angry from the coronavirus and how we respond to that. And we're kind of angry about the whole impeachment stuff and how things go related to that. And, we're just in a point where we have a lot of anger as people in this nation right now. We're not handling it overly well. And it seems like once we think like we could start being done with one thing, we want to get angry about something else. So I just kind of want to talk to you guys about some things I've been convicted about. So anger and them. The recent stuff that happened with George Floyd in Minneapolis, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of where this may go, but I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination. I just kind of want to talk about kind of what I see as our need for healing in this nation right now and as a people. So, what happened with George Floyd, I don't know his rap sheet. I don't know his whole history and background. I've heard stories both directions. But what I do know is that this was not just poor police training that had happened. I'm not a policeman. I've never been trained to be as a policeman. And I know that it would have been wrong for me to, put my knee down on somebody's neck when they're saying they can't breathe and continue to do that. So there's something beyond just a police issue going on here. So the question that we have is when something comes up like this and there's a group that's different than ourselves or me, so there's a group that's different than me, do I allow this situation to create a clear line of them in my heart or in our hearts? So do we look at this situation and say, okay, well, those people or them, they are doing that. Do I create a clear line of who they are opposed to who I am? Them is often what hardens our heart and almost always hurts us or myself more than it hurts them. So I'll get to a point where I'll harden my heart about something. So somebody will do something of a certain group. I will lump all those people into the same group, and then I will allow my heart to say, hey, those people are less than a person, or those people aren't that important. And this is not uncommon in our country. Actually, the sad thing about constitutional law is that our Constitution claimed that Native Americans were 3/5 of a person, so they were less than one whole person. And it also later, with amendments, claimed that African American slaves were 2/3 of a person, so they were less than a whole person. But heart in our hearts almost always hurts us more, and it's us saying that those people or them are somebody that we can classify people as. So it allows us to kind of treat them less than a person. So to me, I ask my question, do I have thems in my life? And why, if I do, why do I feel that I have a need to classify them as them? Is there a reason in it? Is it a fear? Is it something that they've done to me in the past? Is it revenge? Is there a reason why I classify them as them? Anger is a sin and evil when, and I thought about this a good bit and I prayed about this morning, and the answer that I came up through scripture was when our hearts are hardened. And anger is righteous when we have hearts of compassion in that situation. So if we are so hardened against that person that we have anger towards, then it's probably going to be evil. It's going to be a sin. It's going to be something that destroys us. If we have a heart of compassion when we're angry towards somebody, like I can have a heart of compassion and be really angry at my son Emery, but yet that's okay. I'm angry because he's hurting himself, and I have a heart of compassion. And the next question is, how do we act as a result of that anger? So there's times that we should be angry. I don't completely understand. To me, it seems like I have less righteous anger in my life than just Dave anger. And the world's Christian culture has an example of what they think righteous anger is and what we think righteous anger is. But it's not always the same as what Jesus' example of righteous anger is. I'm going to share with you a story that I heard on the history of lynching that I heard from a documentary yesterday.
Dave, can I interrupt for just a second? Can whoever's putting away the dishes please mute their microphone? Thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
So, thank you, Brad. So the Christian, unfortunately, sometimes the Christian culture idea of righteous anger is different than what Christ's example was. The church leaders in the southern U.S. Were defending the lynching of black men between 1882 and 1930. Not all Christian leaders, but some Christian leaders would find scripture to kind of back up why it was okay to lynch black men. And when we looked at why it was, the overwhelming idea of why it was okay to lynch people of different colors in 1882 to 1930 in the southern states was this myth of white womanhood. And this was a phenomena that was basically talking about how, white women were this idea, this symbol of white racial purity and defining the limits. The idea was that, if a black man would come in here and kind of question this idea of white woman racial purity, then that was a reason why it was okay to be able to lynch black men. What this meant is that there were some men that were lynched because they asked to go out on a date with a white woman. There were other men that were lynched because they secretly got married in a state that allowed them to get married to a white woman, and they came back to a state that did not allow this marriage between interracial marriage. Ida B. Wells had claimed that she actually believed this ideology, but before she started researching and seeing that she had people in her immediate sphere of influence that had actually been accused of things that were false just under this idea, this myth. But what the Christian church had done during this time is they made a reason why they could make a person less than a person because of something that they did. And at the time, they thought this was some sort of righteous anger, but this was operating completely opposite to what Christ's example was. So what I'll show here is one example of righteous anger from Christ's example. I don't have a whole lot of examples of righteous anger that I can tell you that it has always been righteous anger. I can think of Martin Luther King as being a person that I would probably point to and say, hey, he had some righteous anger. He dealt with it really well. But there's not a whole lot of other people that I can say that about. But Christ is a pretty good example. So I'll go to Mark 2:23 to Mark 3-6, and in idea of not taking the entire time, I'm just gonna give you the Cliff Notes version of this. So Jesus was hanging out with his disciples, and as it was a Sunday, and they were kind of hungry, so they went into the wheat fields. And the tradition at the time was, in the wheat fields, if there was anything left over, people could just go there and harvest from it. They weren't looters. It's just what was left over after harvest. So they were picking out things to eat from the grain fields. But picking grain was work. Eating was not work by the Sabbath. At that time, there was a bunch of Pharisees, or basically people that were trying to keep the Jewish law, and they just followed Jesus around constantly because they didn't really like him that much. He didn't enforce the law that gave them power, so they were looking at reasons to kind of condemn him or to trap him. So they came out to him on Sunday, and he was picking grains out with his disciples, and they kind of called him out and said, "You can't be picking grains, that's work." And Jesus was like, "Okay," and he gave an example of King David, who was one of their heroes, and said that he did this on the Sabbath. So they kind of were angry, but they kept on following him around. Later, they followed him into the synagogue. At that place, there was a man with a shriveled hand that was there in the synagogue. Jesus knew that they were just looking for a reason to condemn him. So he ended up saying to them, "Which is more lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to kill a life?" And I think if any of us were asked that, whether we were a believer in Jesus Christ's life and experiences or not, we'd probably all say, well, it's a lot better to do good than to do evil. It's a lot better to save a life than to kill a life. But these Pharisees, who were the best teachers of the law in the area, were silent because they knew they were trapped. So Jesus looked at them in anger. And this is from Mark 3. And he was deeply disturbed and distressed by the fact that they had hardened their hearts. So he stretched out his hand and said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stretch out your hand." And he completely restored his hand. The Pharisees were angry, and they began to plot to kill Jesus. But the response of Christ's anger was this idea of working towards compassion towards somebody with a withered hand. Now, he still had anger towards the Pharisees, but he didn't go out there and put his head on their necks and say, "No, I know the real law. I am the law." He didn't go out there and start stealing from them and taking their scrolls from them or anything like that. So in our response to anger, we have to know that there is a right way to respond to anger, and it's through love and it's through compassion. And there's a wrong way to respond to anger, which is basically through our own selfish ambitions and our own posture and us wanting to make sure that we are right in that situation. So for the next 2 minutes, I'm going to get a little bit of personal here. So racism in us, and I'm just to not call out anybody, I'm just going to say racism in me. I am a white, privileged male in the United States of America. I live in the richest country in the world. I am the majority race, and I am a male who's had power for a long time in this country. I don't know what it's like to be in racial injustice. But that doesn't mean that I can't try to live in empathy and compassion towards others. I don't have the experiences that make me an expert on racial injustice. I grew up to fear people that were different from me. In 1982, I remember thinking that all black people were like two of my heroes at the time, which were Mr. T and Bake McBride, who was a Philadelphia Phillies center fielder that ended up, hitting some home runs, and I thought he was pretty cool. I had a baseball card of him, and both Mr. T and Bake McBride had amazing hair. So those were two of my heroes back in 1982. And remember going into a grocery store in 1982 with my mom, and I saw a black man, and I said, "Hey, Mom, look, it's Mr. T." And I said it loud enough so the guy could know, because I wanted Mr. T to know that I knew him. Obviously, that gives you an idea of how few people of color I saw where I grew up in central Pennsylvania. I'm very privileged. Privilege is not something to be proud of, nor is it something to be shameful of. Privilege is just something that sometimes we're born with, sometimes that we acquire, but it's not, if we live in pride of privilege, then it's going to cause us to turn towards hate. If we live in shame of privilege, then it's going to cause us to turn towards self-loathing or self-hate. When I was young in 1982, my idea of black people were they were heroes. They were amazing because these were the two people I knew. I later grew up, when I was in the 4th grade, one of my heroes was Martin Luther King. And I even started, and this will be funny for guys on the line, because I even started dressing nicely because I heard that he used to dress really nice when he was growing up. So I would wear a nice outfit to school when other people wouldn't wear nice outfits to school. I'd get made fun of a little bit. But so, you know, I was pretty amazed. But I remember asking a family member about Martin Luther King, and their exact response to me was, well, he was just kind of a troublemaker. You know, he gave power to a lot of people that really didn't need power at the time. I had a lot of love for that person that said that to me. At the same time, I was hearing from people preaching about the Bible saying things against interracial marriage from some verses that really were taken out of context. So I had this whole change in what my perspective of a different race was. When I was little, you know, I probably heroized it, but it wasn't a bad thing, but it was different. It was racist because I just thought everybody was amazing that was of that color. But then I started growing up realizing that people, you know, weren't quite the same. Embarrassingly enough, through a series of events and some people being kind of, you know, not so nice and other things, you know, you grew up watching the Dukes of Hazzard. And on the Dukes of Hazzard, they had the Confederate flag on the front of their car, on the top of the car. And it was kind of a funny TV show and stuff. And they didn't do anything that bad. They weren't racist or anything from what I can remember of the show. But they had the Confederate flag, and it made it kind of half normal. So my first car when I was 16 was a $200 Chevy Citation, which is a pretty big piece of junk. But I was able to pay for it over the summer. And one of the first things I did for that car when I got it was I made sure I put a Confederate flag on the front of my 81 Chevy Citation. Not to mention it was just a turd of a car. The idea of the Confederate flag being on the front of my car opened me up, gave a room in my house, if you will, or gave an opportunity for people to confront me that had different views about the Confederate flag. And in southern Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which at the time was the home of the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, most of their opinions about the Confederate flag were a lot more divisive than what mine was at the time, which was related to the General Lee. Now, with that, you know, I made opinions I wish I didn't make about people, and I made walls around people for a period of time in my life that I wish I hadn't made. And what I would say is, as a people, I made people into them. Now, it's important for us when we start to make people into them, for us to acknowledge that we're making people into them, instead of just saying, oh no, this is just fine, and justifying why it is that we're thinking that way. Where we're at right now is not new. This has been around for a long time. In Habakkuk, which is a book of the Old Testament, it's about 3 pages in most Bibles, so it's pretty small. You'll miss it if you don't know where it's at. 600 years before Christ, Habakkuk the prophet said, and this was a prayer to God, said, "Oh Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict that abounds within me. Therefore, the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in their righteousness so that justice is perverted." And I see that, and this is no more real today than it was. I mean, it's as real today as it was back then. In looking for something that was true today, I didn't really know where to go. I don't like to just cherry pick and say, hey, what's a verse that tells me to do this? I literally just opened up to this verse this morning and looking at it. And what I see is that we have this justice that's been perverted by us trying to figure out what makes us more right than somebody else. and then we allow there to be an us versus them. And I said racism because we see racism right now, but that them group could be the Democrats, it could be the Republicans, it could be the president, it could be another country, it could be them as those people that have this stream philosophy or that stream philosophy. It could be them as in those people that like cars, vehicles with big wheels, opposed to those people that like lowrider vehicles. But the world's been crying out against this violence and injustice. And it's not time for us to be like, okay, well, this is going to fix itself. It's been here. It's been around for a long time. It's not fixing itself without us continually crying out and being willing to say that this is injustice. King David's Psalm 40, which was 1,000 years before Christ, said, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned and he heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock. He gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. Blessed is the one who puts his trust in the Lord, who does not look to the proud. To those who turn aside false gods, many, Lord my God, are the wonders that you have done, the things that you have planned for us. None can compare to you. So we have these false gods that we put in our life, and we have false gods that sometimes don't look the same as, this, what some people call mythical God, if you will, sin up in the clouds. We have false gods of things of this world, whether it's the false god of a flag, whether it's a Confederate flag, whether it's a don't tread on me flag, whether it's even an American flag, whether it's a false god of something that we're kind of worshiping in life, whether it's a false god of money or power. But what this says is, blessed are those who trust in the Lord, trust that the Lord has a plan and purpose for what's going on here, but does not look to the proud. Jesus had said in his Sermon on the Mount, you're a salt and the light of the world, but if salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on the hill cannot be hidden. Neither do a people light a lamp to put under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light so shine before others, they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. What I would say in the midst of this anger and racial tension that we have is we have an opportunity to let our light shine. We, as believers, we can believe that we are all loved children of God, regardless of if we accept it, regardless of if we don't accept it, regardless of what our color, race, or gender is. It doesn't matter to me how dark your skin is compared to my pale, pasty white skin. You can be a loved child of God and a brother or sister of mine in this greater family. And that is so important, and that shines in front of other people. It's a way that we can look at things and say, hey, this is what makes us us instead of them. This is just what brings us together. One of the leaders of our nation said, well, we'll be able to get through this division once they stop doing what they're doing. And what I would say is it's really hard to get through any division when we constantly call them them. So, sorry, went a little long today. We're going to be talking about rapid evaluation of sediment budgeting through Reed and Dune, 1996's paper. But to close, the inspiration part is your belief and faith should be evident to all those who you come in contact with. And that's really your belief and faith in what it is that you believe in faith in. For me, it's in Christ. But even in things of this world, we should make it be evident in people that we come in contact with. If I think that, a certain type of pizza is amazing and people want to know something about pizza, then why should I not share that with them? This is not a time to be silent as the Pharisees were when asked, is it better to be do good or do evil on the Sabbath. It's not time for us to say, well, we're just going to be silent in this matter. This is an important time for us to be able to stand and say we're not justifying evil. Even if that evil has a hint of truth in it, we don't want to justify evil. That means we don't justify police violence, we don't justify racism, we don't justify looting, we don't justify pride, division, or other selfish sins, and the list could go on. I hear some people saying, well, you know, people are just angry. They should be allowed to be angry for a little while. And that's true. I mean, I don't understand what it must feel like. And it's okay for them to be angry, but we still cannot be justifying that people, have evil actions. We can justify how we treat them because of their hurt and pain, but we can't be justifying that evil stuff. More than the words you say or the t-shirt you wear, your faith must be evidence to all. I shared this quote before. St. Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. I think that's a powerful quote. Is, we have an opportunity here to stand with, our Black brothers and sisters, as well as brothers and sisters of all sorts of different races in their quest for justice. I was given a privilege in this world, but I wasn't given this privilege in this world so I can sit back and just bask in my own privilege. I was given this privilege so I can love others. Let's reach out a hand in love. Let's have compassion. Having compassion a lot of times means we have to listen to the narrative that may not be comfortable for us. What I was taught in school is different than what other people was taught in elementary school in the history classes about the formation of our country. And that's just a fact. We were all taught different things based on the people teaching us, based on the situations, locations where we were taught. Sometimes a narrative, when we're trying to act in compassion towards others that come from a different background, is not comfortable. We don't have to be defensive. We can just listen. Our good deeds will illuminate dark places and shine glory squarely unto God. We don't seek the praise so that we don't seek the praise of men. I think this is important. We're in some dark places right now. And if we're able to love others recklessly and share love with others, and use the privilege that we have at times to share love with others, I think that's going to shine so brightly in these dark times. So I'll leave that open to kind of some thoughts or questions, and then we'll move on to rapid evaluation of settlement budgets. Dear God, we thank you for this time together. Please give us a desire to have our hearts be softened. Please show us opportunities to live and walk towards compassion in our lives. Help us to be thankful for what you've given us. Help us not to live in shame, and help us not to live in pride in the gifts and the privilege that we've been given. Help us to be able to find ways to creatively and recklessly love others in these situations. We love you, and we're thankful for the relationships and experiences that you've gifted us with. Amen.